We want this afternoon to turn from David Hume's theory of ideas and to the application of his theory of knowledge and belief. So I'm entitling this, Do We Know What's Real? Why believe? To get the knowledge and the belief into it. And as you can see, there are a whole series of topics that he addresses in this connection. But in order to make sure we are clear on his theory about knowledge, you can hardly call it a theory of knowledge since he doesn't claim we have it, but theory about knowledge, come back to the line of thought that he sets forth in section 4 of the inquiry. You can outline it in terms of 5 questions. In fact, he enumerates these 5 questions in the second part of it. What is the nature of reasoning about matters of fact? And keep in mind that he is distinguishing matters of fact from relations of ideas. Relations of ideas which are analytic judgments with the logical form of A equals A, therefore things like definitions, tautologies, mathematics. But he's asking now about reasoning concerning matters of fact, factual statements. That'll be true and false, true or false about something. And because he's an empiricist, obviously this will be empirical knowledge. And his answer is that reasoning about matters of fact is in terms of cause-effect relations. And that becomes pretty evident once you come back to the representational theory of knowledge, which says that we are conscious of ideas and impressions and ideas, those together comprise perceptions, which represent to us realities of various sorts, extramental realities. Okay, and knowledge of matters of fact will be the sort that involve ideas predicated one of the other, either by virtue of their logical relationships or by virtue of their factual relationships. So he's asking how we know about factual relationships, matters of fact. And his answer to that is that cause-effect relations are involved, because if we're going to know anything about things beyond present experience being the present content of the consciousness, present perceptions, if we're going to know anything beyond present experience, external realities, it must be by arguing from the experience as the effect to external things as the cause. Cause-effect relations. That's the way Descartes argued the existence of God, Meditation 3. That's the way John Locke argued not only the existence of God, but of material bodies, matter. That's the way Berkeley argued the existence of God, cause of passive ideas, you see. So how do we know matters of fact beyond present experience? By cause-effect relations. All right, so the second question then, what's the foundation of reasoning about cause and effect? And for an empiricist, the answer has to be experience. And you begin to see what's going to be happening. Because in our experience, we do not have any immediate awareness of causal connections, of the force exerted by the cause in producing an effect. We're only aware of uniformities. That an antecedent is followed by a consequent, with some sort of regularity, that he calls constant conjunctions. So two things can be associated in our thinking, in our experience, but we don't know of any causal connection between them. We only know the uniformity, the conjunction. So then we gain that from experience, but then you get a further rider. What's the foundation of reasoning from experience? Well, obviously, to reason beyond experience, its cause-effect, you've got a circular argument. And the outcome is skepticism about matters of fact beyond present experience. Perfectly simple, you see. Grant him his representational theory of knowledge. Okay, that the immediate object of our awareness is just ideas, mental states. Grant him that. And it sounds like his skepticism follows. You see. Which is why next week we'll be looking at Scottish realism, which rejects that theory of ideas. Rejects the representational view. And maintains that we have a direct awareness of material bodies, of causal force, and so forth. But his skepticism follows very naturally. And the fourth question, accordingly, is how then do we acquire beliefs? Because it's obvious that we don't acquire beliefs by giving assent to a weight of positive evidence. As John Locke had said, you proportion your beliefs to the evidence. But if there's no causal evidence as such, how do we acquire our beliefs? You see? And his answer in simplest form is to say it's a psychological habit that's induced by repeated occurrences. You see? We're so accustomed to, in the morning, it getting light, that we say, sure, we can make predictions about it getting light. And it'll be a little earlier tomorrow morning than it was this morning. I was rather delighted to observe last night. Once in a while I come out of other reflections and observe. And I was very delighted to observe that about 5:30 last night it was still almost light. We're getting there. You see, and we can make predictions. But this is more a psychological habit. We are so conditioned by the regularities of experience that we expect. You see? And that habit, that customary frame of mind is what he calls belief. But that leads to a fifth question. If we come up with such beliefs, if they're not caused by something external, you see, but if it's just a psychological habit, well, aren't there other things that we come up with, imaginatively? Fictions that our minds fabricate. How do we know that these are not fictions? Things that we spontaneously come to believe. And his answer there goes back to the distinction he drew in relationship to the theory of ideas. That all ideas are brought into being as a result of impressions. And he maintains that the impression associated with a belief is very different from the impression associated with a fiction. You see, belief itself is an impression. What I'm aware of when I say I believe is a forceful and steady impression. That's his way of putting it. Oh, he says sometimes forceful and vivacious. But particularly talking of belief, he says forceful and steady. It doesn't come and go. It's forceful and steady, persistent. And it's the force of the impression which distinguishes belief from how vivid for the moment may be your impression of my fairy giraffe with butterfly wings sitting on the sill in my office. You know, that doesn't have the force of your belief that I'm sitting on the seat in the office. That is to say, you can be realistic about the fairy giraffe carving that's there, but not about the reality of it being a fairy giraffe. You see. So there's that distinction between belief and fiction that's important. You can think of this in terms of Plato's divided line, if you like. You see. Where Plato had talked of knowledge as distinct from belief, knowledge by dialectic, knowledge by reasoning, let's call it demonstration, because that's the way Locke calls it, demonstrative knowledge. Dialectic leads to intuitive knowledge, you see. Now what you have is down here perceptual beliefs. Perceptual beliefs. And what Plato speaks of as illusion, what now Hume is talking of as fiction. In effect, what Hume is telling us is that we have no intuitive knowledge of matters of fact. You see? We have no demonstrative knowledge of matters of fact, but only of logical relationships. In other words, we have no knowledge of matters of fact beyond present experience. So he eliminates, as it were, the top half of Plato's divided line in his skepticism. And his only concern now is to make the distinction between the two levels in the lower half of the divided line, namely legitimate belief and fiction. You see. So we've come a long way since Plato. You see. All right, now that's the line of thought, and be sure that you grasp this emphasis on belief. We talk of probabilities, and he has that little section on probability, and if you read it carefully, he's saying in effect that probability increases belief. How come? Because what probability amounts to is repeated occasions which reinforce the mental habit. They strengthen the steadiness and